Okay, so my name's Alison. I'm Managing Director of OneTech, and I'm also leading for Capital Enterprise on the Workspace Accreditation Programme. We have set this up as a webinar rather than a roundtable because we have been surprised by the number of people who signed up. So we've got about 60 people signed up. So we thought it was more sensible to set it up as a webinar rather than as an open call. However, when we move on to the questions and answers, you will have an opportunity to raise your hand, and everyone will get an opportunity to speak if they want to. So I wanted just to start by saying how much I wish that we actually did have a workspace accreditation in London right now, because if we had a list of people and organisations who we knew were bona fide and delivering impact, it would be so much easier to help the government understand this whole landscape and how complicated it is to give support to the people who need it most. So I'm really pleased that Capital Enterprise is able to lead the pilot for the accreditation on behalf of the Mayor of London. And the last few weeks, I think, have shown us how important that work will be, and we'll say a bit more about that. Naima, my colleague, and Gracie are both on the call. So when we get started, we've got 5 panelists. Each of them is just going to give a short introduction, 2 to 3 minutes. And then there'll be 3 ways that you can ask questions, and some people have already sent questions in advance, so thank you for those. You can either type your question in the chat box, which is at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can type your question on the Q&A box, which is located near the chat box, or you can use the raise hand function to ask permission and then we can unmute you and you can speak and ask your question that way. The questions we were hoping to look at, or are hoping to look at this afternoon, is what can be done to enable open workspaces and the businesses that they house to access the vital government support they need to survive? How can open workspace providers support the communities they normally house virtually? And how can other stakeholders, particularly people who are on this call today, help in this current situation? So I'm going to stop now and ask Martin Mitchell from the GLA, who's a business rates expert, to make his opening remarks, and then we'll work through each of the panelists, and then we'll do the open questions. Any questions before we get started? No? Okay, so Martin, do you want to go first?
Okay, yes, I'm Martin Mitchell, Finance Manager at the Greater London Authority, and I lead on business rates issues and also council tax related matters. Now, in terms of a bit of background around the government's support around business rates and the related grant schemes, it's probably worth highlighting that it is very much focused on businesses in the retail, leisure and hospitality sector. And when I say that, it's not the entire sector, it's focused on premises that are generally accessible to visiting members of the public. So those businesses receive 100% business rates relief for the whole of the 2021 financial year, and are also eligible for the grant schemes for properties up to 51,000 rateable value. So it's a £10,000 grant up to £15,000 rateable value, and then £25,000 grant from 15,001 to 50,999 rateable value. The only specific additional rates relief or grant support to other sectors, such as the office sector in which workspaces generally operate, is the £10,000 grant that's available to small business rate relief recipients. Now that generally applies to business premises with the rateable value of £15,000 or less, and generally where that's a sole premises. Now there are some exemptions or special treatments for businesses that occupy second premises for up to 12 months, but that's generally the qualifying criteria. Now in the context of workspaces, vast majority of workspaces in London will be above 15,000 rateable value, so won't qualify on the pure criteria, but there are a number of workspaces that are already split up for small business rate relief benefit purposes. So they're split into multiple assessments by the Evaluation Office Agency, and those premises where that's been done, the liable party, as they're called, or the small business occupying the individual spaces, will be the party that's eligible for both the 100% business rates relief available to small business rate relief recipients, or the reduction, at least for premises for assessment between 12 and 15,000 rateable value, which they already get. they're eligible for a £10,000 grant each. Now, boroughs will be putting arrangements in place, and that may require a dialogue with the workspace provider, potentially to obtain contact details, email addresses, potentially where they're not known to the local authority, so they can be in contact with those ratepayers to obtain grant details or make arrangements to send a cheque if that's more desirable to a particular address. And some boroughs have made this, web pages available where businesses can supply their bank account details and email addresses online, but that varies from authority to authority. So I think what the GLO were looking to do is try and pull together a list of contacts, email addresses, contact points in boroughs, and also dedicated web pages where individual ratepayers can find out more information on that. But unfortunately, for those workspaces that have not yet been split for small business rate relief purposes, and bearing in mind the qualifying date for the grants is the 11th of March, so it's effectively the position that the particular workspace was in on the 11th of March, they will not generally qualify for any additional business rates relief or the grant schemes as designed, unless they can make a case that an application had been made to the BOA to split the assessment that was still pending on the 11th of March, or the individual local authority had made that application, where they do have some local discretion, but that's often quite a limited flexibility because it is really referencing a date point in the past, the 11th of March, which is the qualifying date for the grant payments. So we have obviously been in discussion with MHCLG to seek clarification on this point. I'm aware that some workspaces made the argument that they're perhaps more social spaces than necessarily entirely workspaces, so where people meet rather than, which is the primary function, rather than necessarily just being a place of work. But I think the difficulty is that in terms of the rating list and the general legal view, they are offices, not public halls, meeting spaces that might qualify under the leisure element of the retail, leisure and hospitality relief schemes. So generally there is only limited support available to workspace bodies, and that only really applies where they are SBRR recipients at the moment, and therefore, and the local authorities will do their utmost to ensure that the grant payment goes to the SME and not the workspace provider, although there will be a small number of workspaces which, with rateable values of 15,000 or less, that will qualify for SBRR in their own right, and they will get the grant payment directly. So I hope that's a helpful clarifying point. It's not entirely good news for all the sector, but just reflects the nature of the government schemes that they have announced, which are very much targeted on retail, leisure and hospitality, and also nursery and childcare providers, where there is a separate rates relief scheme, but they're not entitled to any grant payments.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you on the detail of that. But we're going to go through each of the panelists' opening remarks first. I'm going to come now to Phil, who's Head of Revenues at the Corporation of London, to get more of a local authority perspective.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Head of Revenues at the City of London, so we're looking at getting these grants out to individual companies at this point in time, and we're working through that, and that's proved a number of challenges for us. Obviously, we normally collect business rates rather than pay it out, so we've had to create credits on the system and work out our payment strategy for getting these out. So we're now doing that, and we hope to get the first set of payments out this week. In terms of how that relates to serviced offices, we have got quite a large number of serviced offices who are currently in receipt of small business rate relief. So that's normally done by the provider of the serviced offices on your behalf, although you're normally asked to sign the form, or someone at the company normally sign something just to say that you're entitled to receive it. So where we've got those forms, they'll be getting those grants without you need to do much at all. We may well have written to you and asked for bank details, and you would have received that very recently in the last week to 10 days. So if you return those forms to us, then we'll make those payments. But obviously that is only the people that are currently in receipt of small business rate relief. If you think you will qualify, and I won't rehash Martin's explanation of what the criteria are, then you can make an application now, providing that you can evidence that you had a lease or a license to occupy that property as at the 11th of March, I believe the date. So, and we will retrospectively apply the relief and then pay the grants. Obviously, we're under a bit of pressure at the moment, so you may need to give us a little bit more time on those cases to catch up, but it won't inhibit getting the grant money if you're entitled. Just make sure, I would just advise that use our form, use the local authority form rather than the one that the provider tends to give you, because sometimes the questions are slightly different. And obviously, given the nature of what we're doing at the moment, we're being a little bit more cautious in terms of how we're paying money out. So we're getting out as quickly as we can, but we'll also make sure that we make sure that we've ticked our boxes and make sure that we can verify who we're paying. So that's everything for me at this point.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Thank you. And now we're going to come on to Gerald Eve. We've got two people coming in from Gerald Eve. Steve on business rates, Malcolm more on rent control, I believe. Steve, you need to unmute.
It's like technical hitch, sorry. That's fine, I'll let Malcolm introduce himself afterwards, but I'm a partner in the business rates team at Gerald Eve, focusing large on offices, and I particularly focus on the serviced office sort of flexible sector the last 10 years. The last 3 weeks have been exceedingly busy for us, trying to advise clients. Basically, all the information that Martin was talking about, and giving them the bad news that most of it doesn't apply to the sector, and there's actually very little support been announced so far. But those clients who have had their offices split in the last few years and are benefiting from small business rate relief, or at least individual suites, have been able to benefit from some of the grants, or the tenants have. We've been busy providing copy demands to provide that proof for them, so they can get that through quickly. We have also had examples where we've got pending claims to split, particularly from Northwest, where the entire centre, or all the tenants in that centre, would qualify for the grants, but the building hasn't yet been split. So we are working with the local authority, because the legislation does allow them to use their discretion. So if evidence can be provided showing that once the building is split correctly, that it would fall below the 15,000 threshold, where hopefully they're going to get the grants paid out to the businesses even before the split's processed. I've been answering lots of questions the last few weeks, so I'll leave it now and let Malcolm introduce himself, because there's also been lots of new rent controls introduced in the sort of COVID-19 regulations. So I'll pass over to Malcolm.
Hi, I'm Malcolm. I'm a partner at Gerald Eve, who deals with rent and lease negotiations, particularly with serviced offices. The main change that's happened legislatively under the Coronavirus Act is that the government have said that anyone can delay their rent payments for the current quarter up until the 30th of June, although they have given themselves facility to extend that to a longer date. But it unfortunately doesn't let anybody off rent payments. So it's really a question of having negotiations between landlords, serviced office providers, in terms of what happens to it. Now, some clients have been willing to reach agreements so that there's no rent paid during that period, but more commonly there's just been agreements to defer the rent for now, whereas the original liability is still in place. There's probably a better situation for tenants that are in the retail and restaurant sectors, but for offices, then not many occupiers have been let off rent yet. Although there are a few landlords, probably the better off ones, that are starting to do that.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. I'm going to come now to Maria from the GLA. Maria's working with us on the Workspace Accreditation Pilot, and she's also leads on the Workspace Advisory Group on behalf of the Mayor of London. So Maria and her colleague Jamie are on the call today. So Maria, your opening remarks.
Hi, thanks, Alison. So Maria, probably many of you have seen my name in the last few days. I work in the enterprise team in the GLA. One of our remits is the Workspace agenda. We've been using the term of open workspace on and off. I know there is a question around that. We just thought, for example, using the open workspace, it means it gives us much more wider remit in this instance of what we mean by it, rather than just classify by the different type of names for each workspace. We've been doing the accreditation project with Capital Enterprise team. We've done in the past the business rates project, advising spaces about the different details about how they have to pay or what they've been doing right or wrong with paying business rates. I've also been working or providing the secretariat for the WAC, the Workspace Advisory Group, and I'm sure Simon will mention later. In the last few days, we've been working to try to get as many providers as possible to sign the letter to government to lobby them to ask that there is business rates relief for workspaces, and also that the tenants are allowed to get the £10,000 grant.
Okay, thank you, Maria. And last but definitely not least, I'll bring Simon in and then we'll move into open questions. So Simon.
Thanks, Alison. I don't have a huge amount to add, really. I think it's been covered in earlier introductions, but the letter that we sent, that Sarah, my co-chair of the WAG group, and myself sent to the Chancellor last week, made the points that Maria highlighted, and I think that's just important to put that on the Chancellor's agenda. And just from the workspace I run, Camden Collective, we suffer also from the fact that as a meanwhile use space, we're still classed as storage. So we have the added burden, as well as also being a charity, of not being able to claim it in the release there. But others will be familiar with these hardships and difficulties. So yeah, why don't we just go into questions?
Okay, thank you, Simon. So I'm going to maybe start with one question that was sent to us ahead of the session this afternoon, and then we'll go to the question and answer panel. So premises such as shared makerspaces that are targeted primarily to hobbyists and for leisure use, offering classes and shared facilities and operating on a membership basis like a gym, are not currently included within the list of premises eligible for business rates relief and grants under the leisure and hospitality. Therefore, it's clear whether businesses that offer shared facilities for leisure activities such as makerspaces, ceramic workshops, etc., will be eligible for support. Is there any more guidance or recommendation on how to deal with situations like this? Is it only up to the discretion of the local authority's business rates department, or is there a more standardised approach that is recommended? Maybe which of the panel would like to volunteer to tackle that one? Martin, I'm seeing you unmuting yourself.
Well, I'm not sure if this might be better for Phil, because obviously there are potential issues with how assessment is used and a report on the rating list and sort of section 44A splits and things like that, where part of a property is used for different purposes for other parts. So maybe Phil can answer this one and then I can chip in afterwards, if that's okay. Sorry.
Sorry, I just missed the beginning of the question. Can you just repeat it? Sorry, Alison.
Premises such as shared makerspaces that are targeted primarily to hobbyists and for leisure use, offering classes and shared facilities and operating on a membership basis, are not currently included. And they're saying there could be some discretion at local authority level. Is there any support for premises like that?
Not that I'm aware of. So I think there might be two questions in there. The leisure and grant, the leisure elements of it. We have checked to see whether the grants extend back to those companies that perhaps connected with leisure and retail, but not actually open to the public, if you like, and we've been told that they don't. And then the second element of that is, my view at this point is that if it's not in the rating list, if it's not separately rated at this point, then they wouldn't be able to access the relief and the grant. So I take the point that where there may be some amendments to the list required, that there is an option there for us to use some discretion. Generally, if it isn't currently in the list, then we wouldn't be looking at it for a grant. We'd need to know that the list was wrong. Okay.
I think we've got somebody. I think David Randall would quite like to come in now, and he's also got a question in the question and answer panel. So Laurel, can you unmute David Randall so that he can ask his question and make his points, please? This is the test. Here we go.
Unmute. There we go. I think I'm unmuted. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hi. So my question, and thank you, for, Martin, for your efforts hitherto, is essentially this one. When you apply, as Steve Hall and others have been very helpfully advising, to get a split recognised that you may have been implementing de facto since April 2017. If you apply and the valuation office accepts your split, you can get your business rates refunded from April 2017. So to me, it seems to be completely inconsistent to say, oh yeah, we recognise that you can retrospectively claim a split to April 2017 for the business rates that you've paid. You can't get retrospectively the money that you might have got under this grant because they put this arbitrary cut-off date on March the 11th. So I think it's arguable to say, no, you should make, if you're recognising a split back to April 2017, then your claim should be recognised under the current COVID arrangements as well.
Anyone want to come back on that one?
Shall I try and answer that to best as I can? I can completely understand that, and I do think that it was considered, certainly from the exchanges that we've had with MHLG, that they had thought that through a little bit. I think that the reason they haven't done that, and where it isn't already in the system, is to prevent people kind of now taking, for want of a better word, abusing the grant system by retrospectively asking for splits. So if the split's not already been requested, then I think that's why they've kind of put that date in. So they have given us a little bit of leeway in that we can use our discretion, as I said in the previous answer, that perhaps where we know that the list is wrong and that it is in the process of being split, that we can then pay the grant money. But where it hasn't been requested and it's kind of now being requested at a later date, they've kind of seemed to have limited that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come to Tom now, who's also got a question I suspect will be also for Phil and Martin. So Tom's question is, if your workspace is a registered charity and receives mandatory rates relief, 80%, will you be able to apply for relief or grant?
Yes. So if there's underlying entitlements, one or both, then you would get either or both.
Okay,
Thank
you. Tom, does that answer your question? I'm going to take that as a yes because he hasn't come back. Okay. Then we've got a question in the chat from Ada, which I'm not sure I fully understand. So Laurel, if we can unmute Ada so that she can ask her question or he can ask his question, that would be really helpful.
Brilliant. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Fabulous. The question was really about workspace providers where there is a situation of live and work. So we've been talking to date about places that are work only spaces, but of course there are lots of spaces in London, amongst which Hackney Wick, in Haringey in particular, where there is a combination of live and work going on. It's completely legitimate, it's covered by the warehouse living policies, but there is an ambiguity around whether they are able to claim any kind of relief. And of course, the upshot of that is that there are creatives in those buildings in particular who are at risk of losing both their home accommodation and their workplace of work. And I just wondered whether there'd been any thinking around that and what rules might apply.
Okay, thank you. I'm not aware of any thinking around that, but do others have anything that they can add on live work situations? Naima? No? I think we've got blank faces here, the ones that I can see.
I think Maria's trying to come in.
Maria.
Do we know how many of these type of spaces there are in London, work and live?
Not completely.
No.
Common sense would suggest that they could be, each part could be taken separately, so there are provisions for each potentially.
If I just come in quickly, I think the GLA culture team have been looking into this because it does mainly affect kind of artist spaces. There aren't
it's not something that's been encouraged in terms of a delivery model in recent years under planning, but they do exist, and as you said, there's a few recent ones that come up. So let me look into that with the team and come back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? We don't have very many any questions in the Q&A. Do people have other questions they wish to ask? Otherwise, I've got a couple here from that were sent in advance. Maybe I'll come to one of these now. So there's a question around the work that the Workspace, what was it called then? The LEAP, anyway. the work that the LEAP did, the London Economic Action Partnership did around business rates in 2018, which Capital Enterprise led. Has the conversation regarding business rates moved on since the 2018 report? If you remember, in the 2018 report, we said that business rates are not working for London's open workspaces, because if a small business is eligible for small business rates relief when renting a small office unit, surely it raises the question as to why they shouldn't be entitled to the same relief if they choose to work in an open plan environment. So the question is, who is leading this conversation? Is there any lobbying? How's the conversation moved on? Will we be seeing any new guidance from government and councils on relief for shared workspaces and incubator space? How can we get more involved in this conversation? I think that's a broader question, not directly related to COVID-19, but still an important question, which probably, if we could answer it, might have been useful prior to the current crisis. So anyone want to say anything about that report and the work that's sort of followed up?
Well, I think it's probably worth highlighting that at the time of the budget, the government did launch a fundamental review of business rates as a tax, which was due to report in the autumn. Obviously, I'm not quite sure how those timetables will work now, because that's potentially likely to be delayed, but obviously bearing in mind that the government was keen to make some changes in advance of the business rates revaluation that was scheduled for April next year, which obviously will have a potential impact on things, whether it goes ahead or not, because rateable values across the country will be revised. They may need to look at the thresholds for small business rate relief, and also that may affect the eligibility of some workspaces for support who might be getting it now, who might not, post-revaluation, and vice versa. So I think it's certainly worth making contributions, as the GLA and the Mayor will be doing, and London boroughs, towards that fundamental review. I mean, we can send details round on the link on that, but I think just formulating your ideas to influence government for that wider debate, and clearly they may want to have a wider look around the viability of the tax moving forward in any case, given the impact of the current financial crisis and challenges, really, and the increasing challenges of relying so heavily on a property-based tax, which is linked to the space you occupy rather than the profit or levels of corporation tax or turnover you have. So that's really very much where we are in terms of government response, the fundamental review of business rates, and also the revaluation due to take place next April. But obviously we're not totally clear how the timetables for that will work. So I think there should be a recognition in government of the challenges and problems facing workspace, because the current arrangements about how they could improve the legislation or the function of the business rate system to deal with those moving forward. And obviously the input of the workspace sector would be very important in terms of influencing that debate.
Thank you, Martin. Do we know if the workspace sector, as you refer to it, is developing any kind of coordinated response or plans to? Is there any coordination? One of the things that's jumped out at me over the last few weeks is how difficult it is to coordinate a response from this sector, because it is such a diverse sector. So I just wonder if anyone's aware of any coordinated response. No, not from the panel. Okay, thank you. And I think linked to that, probably a more strategic question as well, it would be good to hear from any co-working operators or public sector stakeholders on the call who feel they've been successful in capturing and reporting their impact, for example, economic, social or wellbeing impact. It'd be good to talk about recommendations on which KPIs they've used, which data to capture and which systems to use. I might ask Naima, my colleague, who's working on the accreditation scheme, to come in here and just say a little bit about the work that we're doing on the accreditation and some of the criteria that we have been developing and are currently testing with 12 workspaces in London. Naima?
Hi. Well, I'll talk about the accreditation, because we have looked into, and this will be slightly related to talking about the impact measurement. At the moment, it's from the work we've done, which is we've divided the themes that we look for. It's more about affordability, it's more about business support that provider provides, and also about sort of community impact, and that can be social, economical, or environmental impact, and then the business conduct. So these are the 4 themes which we got about 18 criteria for those for the accreditation. Going to just talk about the impact in general, it depends on local authority. There are some sort of tools that have already been used and really sort of very used very effectively, and people can measure whatever the local authority or the funders are asking for. We'd be happy to sort of go through our spreadsheet and share that information and talk to the providers if they are happy to share that information as well. We will definitely do that. So there is nothing specific. There is not one tool. There is not one KPI. There's lots of different KPIs. It depends on what is it that they're looking for. It could be through jobs or GVAs or business growth or just giving, you know. So it's a very, very big and vast sort of area. So I'm happy. Get in touch with us and we'll see what we can share with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done a huge, or Name on Gracie particularly, done a huge amount of desk work, looking at all the work right back from the original sort of IPPR report on this, and all the way through the different metrics that have been used and continue to be used, and the criteria that have been drawn up for the accreditation have learnt, I hope, from a lot of the other work that's already been done on that. So we can share a lot of that with people if you get in touch after the call. Anybody else got anything on that question before I bring John in? John's got a question about government responses. Any other points on the accreditation or on KPIs? Okay, so John's got a question. John's a Capital Enterprise Chief Exec. He wants to know if there's any update from government on following the various letters and sort of cases that have been made to government with regard to the issues that we've discussed already. Does anyone know if government, I mean, we've talked to government, they tell us they're listening, but we haven't seen any action. Has anybody else heard anything from government in terms of likely reactions?
I can jump in here. So we made representations a couple of weeks ago. Was the letter of 30 providers, and from our discussions with Treasury and DCMS, they were looking at ways of how to identify to possibly change, temporarily change workspaces into hospitality, and how they would identify those businesses. And a couple of things were floated, such as like capping the number, so to ensure that it's just independent workspace providers and not a real estate bailout, capping the number of workspaces to 10, and then also license to occupy agreements, because they're used more commonly than a normal lease. But we've got a capacity issue at the moment, but we will be re-engaging like more vigorously on this like next week.
So Joel's from Kodak. If anyone want to follow up with Joel, he's head of policy at Kodak. Okay. I mean that there has been, I think I'm aware of 4 different letters that have been written to different people in government, and I think probably, you know, we need also to follow them up. What's become really clear to me and others involved in this is that a lot of the questions they're coming back with: how many businesses, how many workspace providers, what sort of workspace providers? We don't always have the right questions and answers. So I know that there's quite a lot of work going on at the moment to try and gather some of the evidence that we're going to need to answer some of those questions. I think that's really, really important. There's a couple of people coming back in on the KPI questions. So Polly from Outlandish reminds us about Islington's social value matrix, which is really, really impressive. and she's put some information in the chat which I can share with everybody about an organisation called socialvalueuk.org, which has heavily informed Islington's work and Islington's social value matrix. So Polly, I don't know if you want to say any more about that.
Yeah, just to say, I think that it's important to be guided by your local authority, or guided by whoever it is that's kind of overseeing your area of sort of expertise or geographical area, and ask if they've got a social value matrix that they've adapted, or particular priorities within the area. And we've been working very much in partnership with Islington to develop this. We're also using a piece of software which is being developed by a small independent organisation within our workspace in order to measure our output and measure the kind of growth and the social impact of each of the resident organisations, as well as measuring kind of attendance to all of our events and training and things. And yeah, that's been really good. It's quite early days. But if anyone would like to talk about this software, how we're interacting with any aspect of it, I'm very happy to chat to people via email or whatever.
Okay, thank you, Polly. Thank you. We can connect people. If you contact us after the call, we can connect you with Polly's permission. I'm going to bring Maureen in now from Waltham Forest, and then I think I'm going to ask Geraldine to say a little bit about the empty rate relief, which we think is also relevant. So Maureen, you put a question in about your approach in Waltham Forest. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? Maybe she's gone. I'll read it out. Some local authorities, including Waltham Forest, have an open workspace discretionary rate relief policy for a 5-year period that provides relief that is reduced year on year up to the 5-year date for qualifying workspaces. What is the panel's view on this type of fund being repurposed? Is this something that could gain traction with other local authorities, rather than individual local authorities taking an individual and discretionary approach? Phil, do you have anything on that from a local authority perspective?
Well, there's nothing. It's not something that we've done in the city, and we have a huge amount of serviced office space. And if we come up with our own scheme, in effect, we would have to fund some of that ourselves as well. So it could end up being quite expensive. So that's I don't think that's necessarily just relevant to what's going on at the moment. I think that's sort of a more sort of general point anyway. But I mean, I think I think different local authorities might take a different view if they wanted to encourage more of the sector in the area. But it's not something we looked at in the city.
Okay. I think we've got a few other local authorities on the call. I don't know if any of the other local authorities want to raise their hand if they want to come back on that point from Waltham Forest. If not, we'll move on.
Can I just
go on, Naima?
I'll just from the work we've been doing in the accreditation pilots, because we worked with 8 local authorities, and just to sort of follow Phil's sort of message, there is only Waltham Forest that applies the discretionary business rate relief. So they don't have an affordability definition, but that's what they do, and hence that's been sort of taken into account into the accreditation. So it's all depends on local authorities.
Okay, thank you. So we'll come back, Naima, to your question, which is for Gerald Eve, to see if they could say a little bit about empty rate relief. I know this is some guidance that has been issued on empty rate relief, which might also be relevant to some of the people on the call.
Right. I'm sure Phil particularly will probably have something to say on what I'm going to say now. We've also been advising clients and others that have had to vacate their premises, along with many other advisors, over the last few weeks, to apply for empty rate relief, and also fully aware that under the normal circumstances, most of those premises wouldn't qualify, because all we've moved out are people. Furniture historically hasn't usually been a problem, but we've all basically left functioning offices in place. Now, I know there's a mixed response around the country. Some authorities have come back and granted that relief and shown an element of discretion. Others have come back waiting basically to hear from central government. So I believe there's further discussions going on for some central guidance, because most of the empty properties, inverted commas, over the last few weeks wouldn't have qualified under applications made a few weeks ago, because only people have been moved out, not IT, etc. In between, and certainly in the service sector, we've got tenants that are ending their licenses. Those are normal vacations, so we've been able to apply for empty rate relief on those tenants that have left in the last few weeks or not renewed. There is also some talk around the communal areas, because often the meeting rooms obviously are paid, the rates are paid on those by the operators, but are now empty. And in many areas, relief is being applied for on those. And again, if they're not in use, they would tick the box for empty rate relief. So it would be interesting to see what Phil thinks, because we've had a few applications, including our own, on our own office in the city. But empty relief is still a good way of getting some limited relief at the moment. It's only for 3 months. We ourselves are waiting to hear back from central government on further guidance, really on giving the local authorities, I suppose, the discretion, and at the end of the day, underwriting that discretion, because it will cost local authorities a lot of money if they granted relief to everyone that's applying at the moment. And we're hoping to hear something potentially later this week when the lockdown is, as we would all expect, renewed. That seems an opportune moment for government to come out with some further advice or further support for those in the office sector and the serviced sector. But at the moment, we're still waiting to see. But I'll hand over just to see what Phil has got to say. It'll probably contradict everything I've just said now.
I mean, we've taken the view that if we applied the legislation as it is at this point in time, these offices wouldn't qualify. And I know that there is, there's some open, but that's possibly a little bit open to debate. Where we're probably different a little bit is on serviced offices, where we've very much taken the view that if that lease or license is ended, we would accept that that was empty, and we would award the empty rate for that, because I think that's much easier to demonstrate. I think when you extend that out into the wider area, it's more problematic. And I've seen a number of arguments, not least from Gerald Eve, on plant and machinery, which is the latest one. And again, that's for us. If we were to award 3 months empty across the city at this point, then that's where we would effectively be changing government policy, I think. So I think we have to stick to legislation at this point. We have noted down where we've had applications, where we've had requests. I mean, personally, I think it'd be easier if they were put to one side for the time being, whilst we kind of deal with what's in front of us, and then we can come back to it, because I think it will need government guidance. We've requested it. We have been back to government to say, you can see that there is a possibility that this could apply. You could also equally say that that some of these properties are prohibited by law from being accessed at this point. So that's maybe slightly more of a stretch, but possible to take that view. So I think we do need government guidance on it, because I think it would make such a significant impact if we were just to, certainly in the city or Westminster, if we took that view and just awarded it to pretty much everybody that emptied their office for 3 months. Does that kind of answer the question? Or
so it's watch this space really on that one.
Yeah.
Hoping for more on that this week, but it sounds like if that were to come about, that could be really useful in the short term.
I think just to add to that, I mean, our view, and I've spoken to Martin Mitchell about this as well, it would have been easier if government had just said 3 months for everybody. We're just going to grant 3 months relief to everybody, regardless of sector or anything else. Certainly from and we could have just got on with the grants to those that they wanted to award it to. And not worried about anything else really. But I think that the various sections that they've dealt with probably led to more confusion.
And I think just on that point, that was obviously the arrangement that was put in place by the government in Northern Ireland, where Scotland was a bit with thresholds. as Northern Ireland for everyone, recognising the impact of current lockdown, where we are on things. So that's how we are, but obviously there's always scope for the government to review so far and make potential changes. And property relief will obviously be one of the areas they could look at, as well as some of the thresholds for the existing schemes that they put in place, including the grant scheme. So we can't obviously go back to St Patrick's Day, but it would have been better perhaps if they were inspired by St Patrick's Day and had followed what they were doing in Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure I've quite followed that one, but okay, I think we'll.
That's all right. I think I find that there is a different approach being adopted in Northern Ireland, where they're granting a business rate holiday for every business rate of sector, as opposed to ones where there's this approach to three sectors, most to every else, which is obviously great for lost commons. The Northern scheme would have been a lot simpler, would have been cheaper. The government has announced, but obviously you'll have a difference from that, depending whether or not you're in the retail, leisure, and hospitality. You're in this, you're in Dutch manufacturing business.
Okay, thank you. I think John has got his hand raised. John, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's about the removal of the lockdown. I mean, it's likely that will occur in about a month's time, if not before. Co-working spaces will be in great pressure to open up then, and obviously very unlikely they'll be able to do the 2 metre basically a distance between individuals, and obviously with the communal space even more difficult. What's the advice to co-working spaces once the lockdown is going to end, and can we use the fact that basically unless there is special measures in co-working spaces that they will have to reopen very soon, and therefore maybe affect the government's wider basic social distancing measures?
Does anyone have any comments on whether or not co-working spaces will be treated any differently to anybody else, or workspaces will be treated differently to anybody else when lockdown is lifted?
I mean, is there any guidelines on social basic distances that co-working spaces will have to basically adhere to?
Well, I think not at this stage, because clearly they're waiting further guidance from the government about how the lockdown will be removed and whether that will be a big bang or a progressive approach, as say they've adopted in Spain, where obviously construction companies can now start work today and factories can start work, but not necessarily office-based businesses. And obviously there is the wider issue, particularly in London, around the use of public transport and the ability of the network, bus work to do with one capital lines and social distancing public transport as well, which is obviously strict to here in little work at the moment, which to be taken into account that see as a London issue where a lot of people go to public transport rather than car. I think to wait further advice and guidance on that, how I intend to reduce the impact of the lockdown over the next few weeks, and whether that will be possible or whether they will remove it for all seasonal businesses at the same time. Probably no further update at this stage, but we'll get some clarification on that next few weeks.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to come in on John's question? No?
Have all the spaces been closed? Because my understanding is some spaces are still open. So it would be good to understand on which basis spaces have decided to close or remain open. And also maybe each space is kind of taking their own decision on how they implement social distance. So if anyone can answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of workspaces on the call. If any of you have thought about how you might answer that question as the lockdown is lifted, I tend to think a month might be a bit optimistic, but when we do finally go back, Shazia has put a couple of comments in the chat. Shazia, do you want to come in? No, or any other workspace providers?
I can answer that while Shazia is unmuting. So for Mapleworks and Cambury Works, we do have users who have a critical need of using the space. So we've got some makers who are making face visors, and we've got one lady who works for the NHS who does, she's doing an online mental health a kind of support service, which you can't do at home because she hasn't got a good enough internet connection. So for these exceptional cases, we stayed open, but then, you know, to be compliant with what government is saying, we said to other people, if it's non-essential, then you shouldn't come. So officially, we're still open.
And has anyone done anything else in terms of introducing new process to ensure that you know, social distancing can be observed even for essential businesses? No.
No, just to say, I mean, we apply common sense. We ask people to, you know, take a common sense approach, and we.
Always a good rule. Okay, any other comments or questions?
Can I come in if I just start speaking? Is that how it works? It's Claire from the Melting Pot in Scotland. We're expecting to not be able to come out of lockdown until the end of June. I believe there seem to be some different expectations of how long lockdown will last depending on what country you're in. But anyway, we're imagining, we were told 12 to 13 weeks. So that means we won't be officially allowed to come out until the end of June. And then we hit our summer slowdown and the school holidays. So you know, the idea of actually opening is miles away from where we are. So the social distancing part of it, we've already been in our quiet period. How we actually encourage people to come back out is, I think, quite a long way away from where we are. Surviving until then and retaining our customers until then, trying to engage with them over a 3-month lockdown while many of them lose lots of their work. I think that's a kind of a higher state of what we're focusing on right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not easy. And some people, like Tom in the chat, he said that they've moved a lot of their members to virtual membership so they can still provide some value even when they're not in the physical space. We've got a couple of people in the chat who have left premises open for things like bakery, bread, that kind of thing. Lisa, who's considering a booking system. Lisa, do you want to come in and say what you're thinking about doing there?
Hiya. Yeah, this was just literally just a thought that popped into my head as you were talking, and I've only got 7 people in my space because I've only recently set up, but it just seems like it would be quite a simple way with my group for everybody just to check in with when they want to use the space. So there's only a certain number of people in there at one time, and people can social distance much more easily, just in the immediate aftermath after lockdown has been lifted.
Okay, thank you. And then we've got Claire Carpenter who raised her hand.
I just spoke. Yeah, hi. I just spoke a minute ago. But just to add, we have 181 clients who share physical space together, and they are all now on a virtual communication and package. But yeah, who knows when they'll come back out the woodwork.
So we've got quite a lot of examples of virtual memberships. I think Justine from Idea London has also created a virtual membership to try and keep the community engaged. And I think a lot of people based in these co-working spaces are accessing services virtually, even if they can't access the space.
Sorry to interrupt, but that's the case. But it's really a retention. It's a retention strategy for your clients, because switching them from a 50, 100, 150, 250 pound a month package to £10 a month, or let's just keep chatting with you every now and then and putting some stuff virtually, I mean, that's costing our business money as an engagement tool. the critical things that we've got going on business-wise. It's fantastic to be able to furlough people. We can't furlough everybody. We're a charity, so we have 100% rates relief anyway. We've gone for the hospitality grant because we run a venue hire, and so the hospitality angle there. Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky.
Yeah, it really is. Okay. Any other name has got her hand up, her actual hand up.
I wanted to just to highlight one example of the provider that we worked with. They were worried about security, so they had to swap between all the businesses, and each one comes once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks to the building, so they always had somebody in the building. That's how they just thought I'd share that with you.
Thank you. And Namer's, so Hector is talking about a platform called Syncaroo. Hector, do you want to say something about that? No.
Yeah, so we basically realized that although many communities are going virtual, there are some that are having to keep their doors open for essential businesses. So we built a platform that's basically going to allow us to update all the booking platforms and the aggregators with whether a space is open for essential businesses, just so that we can connect those businesses to space that's available, as well as allow local stakeholders and decision makers to see the availability of space in every city. So I just wanted to put that out there as something that we're bringing to market for free.
Okay, thank you. It sounds really interesting.
No worries.
Any other comments or questions for the panelists, for each other?
I have, if I may.
Yeah.
It was really essentially, if you're looking at the timeline of the development of the advisory committees around Workspace, you started off with an open workspace providers group, and then there was a workspace providers board, and then there's a workspace advisory group, which is what we're now in. The word open workspaces seems not to have as much currency as it used to have. Is there a reason behind that? Or are we sort of conflating all the different kinds of workspaces into one? Or are we still distinguishing between the ones that add social value and the ones that don't?
So maybe we'll get Maria and Simon and Jamie to comment on that, or a combination. Who wants to go first? Jamie? Or Maria?
I can go first. So yeah, the Workspace Advisory Group, WAC, as it stands now, which the new version was reconfigured is probably about 8 to 9 months ago. The reason why it changed its name is because we've widened the remit of the group. So it has more members from different organizations, which are not only, as the remit was before, more socially orientated. So we kept the existing members from the previous iteration of the group, but we've now got other members, which is why the name of the group had to change. And again, the remit of the group, so there's projects like the Accreditation Project, which has a social element, so that remains, but also is the remit of the group is trying to identify what is what was going to be the future of the sector, what type of challenges or issues was going to be facing. And we had devised in the last few months an action plan, which probably will be redundant now, so we'll have to relook into it. But the idea is to look at the future and what could we do for the sector.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I think the policy steer we've had from the current mayoral administration is to focus on the wider issue of affordable workspace, not just through open workspace. And what was previously a providers group of open workspace providers that had social outcomes in mind, is now a group that includes users of Workspace, includes developers of Workspace, as well as the providers. So it was an intentional thing to widen things out. I think there may, people may disagree, but I think the market had changed somewhat since we first established that providers group, and the kind of interventions that were required at that time are very different than what's required now.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie, can I just come back on that very quickly? I think that is a very useful clarification, sticking the word affordable in there, because without it, it's a bit unclear that affordability is what you're going for. Because with the current remit, you could include 22 Bishopsgate, for example, which is Stuart Lipton's £300 million development, and that's Workspace. So there needs to be that distinguishing title needs to be in there. Otherwise, we'll lose that. We'll lose that distinction, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a really valid point. We want the intention of the group is to encourage affordable workspace wherever that may be. So it may be tertiary, back of high street type space, as well as the open workspace agenda, but it's also about making sure that new developments do have that element of affordable workspace as well. But that's outside the accreditation would be a stricter and specific sort of product. But the work of that group would be looking to encourage the availability of affordable space wherever that might be.
I think this links back to another question that's in the Q&A from Marcella, which is basically referring back to the original IPPR report, Start Me Up. 96% of all businesses in central London, in fact I think it's higher than that, are now SMEs and freelancers. Without any support from government, pretty sure many of us won't survive if this lasts over 3 months. Is the GLA trying to lobby central government in our favour? So Jamie, are you able to comment on that question? I know there's a question mark about the GLA's role in this.
Yeah, so there's been as you can imagine, the free-for-all in terms of different policy areas where everyone's feeding into the strategic coordination group, which is pan-London, but in City Hall we play a key role in feeding into that. There's a business impact subgroup that sits under the London-wide SCG, and even within that work stream there's obviously a hierarchy of priorities. And we've initially, as you'd have seen over the weekend, there's a letter that's gone into the Chancellor from the Mayor that was featured in City AM that talks about the impact on self-employed. And you'll see, although that does look, and obviously, that covers a lot of this kind of tendency you have in your spaces, but there's a big focus there on the kind of the impacts specific groups may be feeling. It may be around the self-employed requirement to have previous year's accounts, where somebody who's been on maternity leave or has career gaps would miss out. So the focus has been on looking at some of those issues initially. The issue around landlords is certainly a current live issue. I'm not aware of any lobbying that's gone into government from City Hall yet, although we're obviously fully aware and as officers very supportive of the letter that went into the Chancellor from Simon, Sarah and the rest of and many other reps from the sector. But that is something that's being developed at the moment alongside a wider piece around business support and finance directly for small businesses.
Okay, thank you. Simon, did you have anything you wanted to add to that as the sort of signatory of the letter?
I don't think there is actually. There's no point just saying stuff for the point of saying it, is there? Oh, it's been covered.
Okay, thank you.
Can I say one more thing? Is it all right, Alison?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that there's a whole wider question for us to discuss. Now's probably not the time, but at some point in the future, maybe through the advisory group, and that is about land reform in general. London is going to have to go through some kind of land reform because of the vanishing high street, because of the need, the critical need to engage with landlords, particularly institutional landlords, about how they're managing their portfolios to make it easier for affordable workspaces to flourish. And we have to actually be quite vocal and very, very strong in challenging the status quo. We can't just leave things as they are, and we need the local authority support in that as a sector. So somehow we've got to coalesce around land reform and get onto it, using this as a catalyst.
I don't mind responding to that if that's helpful.
Go on, Simon.
I mean, I think we'd all agree with you, David, that better use of land is important in all kinds of ways, and certainly that the sort of change that we're expecting to see in our town centres and high streets over the next 5 to 10 years is now going to happen over the next 5 to 10 months. But I'm not sure we quite know how that's going to pan out yet, and I think the appetite for taxing land, I think, will change. But I do think we also have to recognise the sort of realpolitik of the situation we're in at the moment. I don't think we're going to get the mayor's office particularly engaged in arguments around that take us a little too close to things like land value taxes just yet. But you never know in time.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to the chat, I think this one's just a sort of general thank you and good to hear about the pilot for accreditation. Tom's saying that this call is highlighting just how necessary a scheme like this is in terms of educating government and local councils on the value that workspaces can and do provide. He says that he feels like maybe small providers in particular are being overlooked at the time through current support initiatives. So hopefully the letter that was sent last week and the other letters that have also been sent will also enable smaller providers to get some benefit from the government schemes. Leo has a question, wondering if anyone's got any advice, this is a tough one, any advice renegotiating rent payment to private sector landlords for this quarter? Anyone got any advice on how to negotiate with a private sector landlord?
Hi, it's Malcolm. Yeah, I've been dealing with quite a lot of private sector landlord negotiations, and I think the key thing is to have a fairly full and frank dialogue. I mean, landlords are getting a lot of appeals at present from tenants who are saying, oh, things are a bit difficult, I don't think I can pay, what are you going to do for us? And, frankly, landlords, a lot of them are in bad position as well financially, because they've got lenders and other people that they need to keep happy. So the more you can go to a landlord with a considered case saying, this is what I've done, I've checked whether I've got any insurance, I've looked at furloughing some staff, I've rerun my business model, I think I can scrape by and could be a good tenant in the future, but I'm going to need some help from you to get there. That's much more likely to be well received than just a general sort of, oh, it's all very difficult, what are you going to do for me type of approach. So I think that sort of dialogue. I mean, quite a lot of landlords have responded saying, yeah, we're happy to give you time to pay, but they will need some convincing if they're actually going to let individual tenants off of paying rent. But it will depend a lot on the characteristic of the landlord, whether they're actually in a position where they can do that. Because some of them are very hard pressed by other financial commitments that they've got. So it's much more difficult for some landlords than for others to actually agree to give rent holidays. There are other solutions that are being tried as well, more conventional leases, sort of extending the length of term and moving out break clauses, deferring rent reviews. These are all other things which are being talked about, and some deals put together on that basis.
Thank you. And Jamie's just popped into the chat the link to some guidance on how to negotiate a rent holiday, which might be useful, Leo, as well. Maureen's asking a question about the letters. So I've only got a copy of our letter and Codex letter. Joel, are you happy for the Codex letter to be shared with everybody on the call?
Yeah, of course, that's fine.
Can you send a final version along with the list of signatories? I don't have that version, I don't think.
Yeah, sure, I'll send that over.
Helpful. And I've got another letter which was originally by Tim Barnes with Nesta, also signed by Capital Enterprise, which I can share. The other one is I've only seen referred to, so I don't have a copy of it. But we can definitely share the letters that we're aware of with people on the call. Any other comments or questions?
On the topic of the letter, we're trying to gather information from everyone who signed and who is interested to be part of it, of how many spaces they manage, how many businesses they have as tenants. So if you could share those questions with all those attending here. So we're trying to get as much information as possible to answer any questions from the Chancellor. That will be really useful.
So I think there's a similar, I don't know if maybe it's the same campaign, but Bernie, can you say anything on the information that you're trying to collect through the London Co-working Assembly? Because it'd be sensible for us to join this up and make sure we're all collecting the same information and not duplicating. Bernie, do you want to say any more about that? I can share with you, if not, Maria, after the call. Naima, there's a question for you. What are the next steps on the accreditation scheme? When might we hear an update? What will the accreditation actually say? Is it telling occupiers that we have high quality workspaces? Is it the hub manager or staff that get assessed? Is it telling the public sector that we are impact businesses? Good question. Naima, do you want to try and address that one?
Yes, very good question, because that's one of the things that when we started the pilot is looking at, do we accredit the provider, do we accredit the space, you know, so it's been what we, you know, as I said earlier, we tried and sort of, this is more about accrediting the provider in a particular space. So it's having, even if you have multiple spaces, then we have to go and visit those spaces and we have to include them at a later stage. But at this stage, what we're doing is literally this space with the provider that manages it. And the accreditation is to say to everyone that the space has, it's affordable. So affordability, we got definitions from the 8 local authorities that we're working with, and we're trying to pick up as many definitions out there as possible. We also have the London work plan definition if a local authority doesn't have one. Within the affordability, there are 4 criteria that you have to go through. So you could be either you're below market rate at a particular area, not just local authority. So it could be within local authority, but it's in different areas and depend on what the rate is. You provide packages that include lots of sort of benefits for the tenant that are going to be based in the space. We're looking at sort of also just having an easy in, easy out, and then we'll add business support, networking, supporting new tenants, making sure that they are you know, sort of getting all the support that's available. It doesn't have to be just by the provider, but it could be just from a local level or national level, that you bring in resources from everywhere. We're looking at impact, so looking at the measurement of impact. So it could be whatever your local authority is asking you for. So those are where the KPIs come. And then it's just a business, you know, sort of just a conduct. How do you run your business? Are you a London living wage? Do you have all policies and procedures to include all communities and everybody in, you know, into your space? And so it's what is next? We've the pilot has started last October. We've put all the criteria together. We started the testing. We've already met. We got 12 workspaces in the pilot. We've met with 9. 1 we're meeting with them next week, so that's the 10th, and 2 are closed for the moment because of the situation, but they have promised that they'll be coming back. So the idea of it is, we do an introduction, we show them the process, we go through the evidence, we go through the guidance, what is it that we need, and we're collecting information as much as we can, we're collecting feedback, and we're putting it all together to this huge, big spreadsheet. So any comments, even from today, anybody who has anything to add, please, by all means, just send us your comments. And then the testing is going through the accreditation, is literally checking their evidence, checking what is it they provide, is it you know, and the assessor has to make decisions there. And once that it's done, we're hoping by July we will have some people who've gone through the process. So it's all dependent on the situation at the moment, but it's all working online. We've moved everything online. We've got Dropbox, we've got everything. Our meetings are all happening online. And the only thing that we're going to be having a problem with is visiting the sites, because part of the one site. The assessor has to visit the site. And yeah, so that's where we are. Once we've got some information to share with everyone, we do go and do lots of we went and gave lots of presentations. So anybody who wants to invite us to present, we're happy to do that, and to share whatever we have, whatever information we have at the moment. But we will be have some more information to share, hopefully by June, July, and that's you know, I think that's all what we have. We are very hopeful. It's one of those projects that's still going ahead and still working, and still we had one meeting this morning. So here you go. So that's where we are. I think maybe I've answered the question. Anything else I need to add?
Just how long does it take to get the accreditation? That was a supplementary question from.
What we did, we've set when we put the all the evidence, when we put it all together, we set 6 weeks between the kick-off meeting and the sort of getting the accreditation. So 6 weeks to go through the process, but that's not going to, unfortunately, that's not going to be the case now, because you know, some people had more important business to get on with, you know. So we're relaxing it at the moment. So it's about 3 months to get the accreditation. And then the decision is going to be is how long that accreditation will last for. So that's, we're looking at 2 to 3 years. So let me just.
I guess the only thing, just to add from my perspective, there's a question about the need for consistency across the sector, which I completely agree with. We've gone through this in quite a lot of detail, and there are 10 criteria which are mandatory and which will be consistent across the whole of London, across the whole sector. And then there are 8 criteria which are more discretionary and allow for some local nuance. And I think that was a kind of compromise that we reached, having talked to a lot of workspace providers and a lot of local authorities. I think we've got 2 more questions which are linked from David. He's being very, very lively and putting them in the chat and in the Q&A. So I think it's the same question. Are landlords getting breaks on their commercial mortgages? Landlords can't give rent breaks unless they get these breaks on their commercial mortgages. Are we and the GLA going to help them with that? Any panelists wanting to comment on that one? So are landlords getting breaks on their commercial mortgages? I think that's the core question. Malcolm?
Yeah, generally not. Again, it's very much an individual discussion with lenders, but the impression I've got from landlord clients is that they have not had much success in getting breaks on commercial mortgages so far. There may be some concessions made so that they may be a bit out of kilter with the borrowing requirements, that they may be relaxed, but I don't think that many landlords are being offered any holidays from their lenders at present.
Okay, and do you think there's anything that can be done to change that? Jamie's also wanting to come in. Jamie?
Just to say that, you know, this is obviously one that we're considering in terms of our lobbying and advocacy asks. The tricky bit of this, to be honest, is making sure that any of those breaks are passed on to the tenants themselves. So how do you ensure that actually happens? We've seen similar problems with, for example, with TfL. Across the TfL estate, we've got a 3-month rent break, but where some of their sites are subletted out fully legally, but that's the arrangement they have, making sure that, you know, quite often they're not being passed on to the tenant. So we're coming up with some solutions about how that can work, and we want to apply that to any sort of advocacy ask we give to government. But we need those solutions as well. We can put that in.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's not easy. I think coming into this roundtable, I was thinking, gosh, there's so many problems. Do we have solutions? But I think, if nothing else, it's been really useful to hear the different opinions and the different approaches from different people around the table. So thank you everybody for participating so actively. I think we've got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions or comments if people have anything burning that they want to finish with. No, I think we're probably done. Okay, so I'll wrap up there. I'll say thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you very much for everyone who's joined. Hopefully it was useful. We'll definitely be continuing the conversations through the workspace accreditation work that we're doing, and through our work generally at Capital Enterprise. We will share copies of the letters with people. We will also share a recording of the session if people think that's useful, and anything else that you want us to do, let us know. We can try our best. Okay, thank you everybody. We'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.